My name is Monk Rowe, and we're filming for the Hamilton College Jazz Archive in Clearwater Beach. I'm very pleased to have Dave Frishberg with me.
Thanks, Monk.
He was a songwriter extraordinaire and a man with a unique sense of a lyric, I think.
Well, I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. Can you recall, when you look back on your musical career, your first inspiration to write a song?
Huh. No, I can't, but I can tell you what impressed me as a child musically. I think the first thing that really made me just excited was Gilbert and Sullivan. Oh. I just thought that, and especially the Mikado. My family had those recordings, you know, on 78s with Martin Green and the doily cart. You know, this was the 1940s. And I really listened hard to Gilbert and Sullivan. And as a kid, I mean, before I was 10 or 12 years old, I could sing practically the whole Mikado, plus other Gilbert and Sullivan stuff too. Yeah, and I still find that music just intensely gratifying. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Growing up.
And words too.
Oh yeah. You were in Minnesota.
Yeah.
Grew up.
Yeah.
What was the musical atmosphere like in your town?
Well, bebop was being born around that time. When I was growing up, when I was in high school and at the University of Minnesota, I was a member of bebop groups. I mean, we called ourselves bebop groups, and we tried to imitate the music that we heard on recordings. And the bands around town that were working in the clubs were bebop groups. Now, there was another bunch of musicians that I didn't know too well, and that was Doc Evans and some other players who were the traditional players, and there was a strong scene going on in the Twin Cities at that time. But I wasn't part of that at all. I was young and looking forward to bebop.
Okay, so you guys were thinking pretty modern then.
We thought we were, yeah. We were cutting edge.
Uh-huh. What led you to the piano? Just one in the house?
Yeah, there was a piano in the house, and I just went to it naturally. Took some lessons for a while, maybe till I was from the age 8 to age 9 or something like that. But I didn't enjoy the lessons, and I hated the discipline of the practice. So I abandoned the lessons, but kept at the piano. Yeah, myself.
I guess you did. When I look at the list of people that you've played with and that have played with you, it's pretty darn impressive. You eventually, like a lot of people, moved to New York. Was that specifically for the music?
Yeah, it sure was. I had just come out of the Air Force. I'd spent 2 years in the Air Force, and I was deciding which coast to go to. I knew I wasn't going home to the Twin Cities, but I was going to go to either New York or California. And I ran into, I was stationed in Salt Lake, and the Woody Herman Band came through. I met some guys on that band and hung out with them for the couple days they were in town. And they encouraged me. One of them was Bob Newman, a saxophone player. He encouraged me to come to New York. You know, he said, you got to go to New York. That's where it's really happening. That's where the most creative. He said, that's where Sonny Rollins is. Oh, I said, and then I understood. Of course I've got to go to New York. Well, it turns out I did go to New York. And Bob, of course, said, as soon as you get there, look me up. I can get your work right away. Wouldn't you know it, when I got there, you know, a few months later, Bob was nowhere to be found. He had left New York by that time. So that was it. And I stayed in New York for 15 years or so and played a lot. I mean, I didn't lack for work and got to play with just about all the good musicians I ever dreamed of playing with. But I never met or got to play with Sonny Rollins. I saw him in person a couple times, but I don't think I ever did have the pleasure of meeting him.
Wow. He's a very unique
Yeah, he's great. He's great. He was one of my real heroes and remains that way,
Yeah. He has such a way of interpreting songs and finding the...
Well, it's the old Sonny Rollins. I'm talking about the Sonny Rollins of the 1960s, maybe, that really got to me. the newer stuff I haven't paid much attention to, but
Yeah.
the way he handled pop songs, like you said, that really got to me. I loved it.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a mind at work that I really was interested in there.
Showing up in New York, is it mostly like word of mouth, meeting the right people?
Yeah.
That's how you get into the scene?
Yep. First day I was there, I went to Junior's Bar. And it was on 52nd Street between Broadway and 8th Avenue. And someone told me, probably Bob Newman, as soon as you get to New York, go to Junior's Bar. That's where everybody is, and just tell them that you're there. I did it, you know. First night I was there, somebody took me to a jam session. And I played, met a couple of musicians. One of them was a guy I've known ever since, a bass player by the name of Jack Six. And the very first night I was in, might have been the second night, but I was just completely new to the city. That's when I met Jack. Yeah, just hanging out, getting your face in, and gaining a reputation in those days at the jam sessions, which were in lofts in New York City. You go to the loft and you play. It wasn't really competitive. It didn't feel competitive to me, although reputations were made in that situation. But it was more camaraderie and sharing of musical material. And I learned a lot from people, talking to them and playing and hearing them play in these loft sessions.
What kind of tunes would they call at those things?
Well, I remember we used to play I Remember You. That was a hip standard of the time. Have You Met Miss Jones? The repertoire that I enjoyed playing was the song bag, you know, the American Songbook tunes. I love that. But then, of course, we were into the originals, like the Sonny Rollins originals, Pent Up House, and I forget the titles, but we all knew them. And the standards. You know, in those days, repertoire was so important, especially to a piano player, you know.
I guess.
Because, well, I mean, no, I shouldn't say especially to a piano player. For everyone, because we were all, you know, it was the days when you said yes to everything. And there was no gig too meager or demeaning to say no to, you know? It really didn't seem, you said yes. And therefore you had a lot of adventures and also learned a lot of stuff. But you needed to be prepared. And repertoire was your arsenal of things that you brought to the table.
Right.
So, you know, when you'd looking at the Union, you'd be down at the Union Hall on Wednesday afternoons. You know about the Union Hall.
Yeah, but I want to hear how this
worked.
worked.
And then you'd be hanging out there just so you get your face known, you know. Then the musicians would take you by the hand, they'd lead you around, and this is just Irving Grauer, or whatever his name is, you know. He's got a board, you know. He's writing down things. He says, you know all the tunes? And then you're supposed to say yes, you know. Some people would say no. Some people would say all but one.
No, they don't call that one.
Right. Yeah, so you had to know songs. And then, of course, at the sessions, you learned repertoire, jazz repertoire, you know. But the idea at the jam sessions was to just blow your brains out. You were there to blow choruses and just play hard as hard as you could as a jazz player, you know. And it was all in private. It was all for the visceral pleasure of the whole thing, you know. Also, it was socially interesting, you know. I met a lot of people there for the first time in lofts.
How did you find out about the jam sessions? Just word of mouth, or were there certain places that they happened all the time?
Oh yeah, there was the loft on 34th Street. There was the loft on 6th Avenue in the 30s. Those were the two main ones I went to. There were others down in the Bowery district. One of the lofts I went to a lot belonged to the famous photographer W. Eugene Smith. Have you ever seen his name around? He's a photographer, a journalist photographer who's now deceased, but he was a very prominent Life magazine photographer, along with these other, like Capra and those others.
Yeah.
And this was his loft, and in fact, I think he had 2 floors of that building, and we were living on his level was Hall Overton, a pianist and arranger. And they had a nice piano there. And I used to go there to make a lot of sessions. I met a lot of wonderful musicians there.
So going back to this this union thing, they would put bands together for certain occasions that.
Well, no, these were for club dates.
Okay.
These weren't jazz gigs.
No, I know that.
No,
It
no,
was
they
like
were
club dates, and they'd say, okay, this is an anniversary party or something.
Well, we wouldn't know what kind of party it was. It would just be, you know, like Sid Zieler's got a job. He's doing a job Friday night in Long Island. He needs a piano player.
Okay.
And do you know all the tunes? And then you say yes, and then okay.
Would they give you like any instruction, like what to wear?
Yeah, they'd say wear a tux and be
Okay.
there at 11 o'clock. And how do you get there? Well, someone will pick you up. And
All right.
pick you up right outside of Junior's. And okay.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Yeah.
I'm just trying to figure out the people that were hiring the musicians. They didn't call the union, right?
Nobody called the union.
Okay.
It was all face-to-face meeting people and gaining a reputation.
Right.
The people who wanted to get in the club date business were intent on impressing the contractors and the band leaders. And they cultivated those friendships. They would probably send them gifts. Who knows? I don't know. But that wasn't my end.
Okay.
But I did my share of that work.
Yeah.
Yeah. The union didn't really provide much of an employment agency
I see.
function at all.
Yeah.
It was a place to pick up checks, if there were any, and to meet with union officials regarding contracts.
Right.
In those days, a lot of musicians were on payrolls, and there were a lot of contracts involved. It's a different music business today. It's not like it used to be.
Yeah.
It was pretty union dominated. If you weren't a union member, there was very, very good, worthwhile work that you were eligible to do.
I see. Okay. What was your first experience in a recording studio in New York?
It was a kind of a pop record that was being produced by a man that I had met and had been working with, an accordion player by the name of Matt Matthews.
Mm-hmm.
You know who I'm talking about?
No.
He was from Holland. Played button accordion, very good player. But in this instance, he was the producer, and I had been rehearsing with some singers in his studio and so forth. He liked my playing, and he put me on this date, and I was reading a part, and it was. And I remember the band. I mean, do you want me to go into who the band was? Because I remember who the band. It was astonishing. It was the drummer was O.C. Johnson, and the bass player was Wendell Marshall. I played piano. A guy by the name of Everett Barksdale played guitar.
Mm-hmm.
Clark Terry. Big Nick Nicholas was with the tenor player. Jerome Richardson. And somebody else. Okay, I mean, it was, wow, what am I doing in the studio with these people? And this was my very first record date. My knees were like knocking. I couldn't believe it that Matt had called me for this. You know? Wow, this is heavy duty. New York.
Yeah, all those heavy duty guys in there making, I mean.
Oh, they were studio players. That was their life, you know.
Yeah.
But I knew who every one of them were.
Yeah.
So they didn't know me at all. So I walk in there, and Matt, the song was named Prisoner of Love, you know. And I don't want to say the name of the girl who was singing, but it was Prisoner of Love with a kind of a rock triplet background to it. And then she would sing, she started, alone from night to night, you'll, and the part went, I was turning these pages, it went about 10 pages, and it was all written out, you know, ding, 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 bung, gung, gung, with slashes. Every little triplet was written out. And I just read every one of them. At the end, to take one, I turned around and the musicians were laughing at me, you know. And I said, well, what happened? Did I do something wrong? And they said, "We never seen anybody read that stuff before." But O.C. Johnson was very nice.
Yeah.
And he said, "But you know, it felt great." He said, "It sounded great, felt great." So he put me at ease. But they were laughing, you know.
Yeah.
I thought it was my duty to read every one.
Mm-hmm. A typical kind of 6/8 thing.
That's
yeah,
right. Yeah, right.
Well, that it's a question I've been interested in is how much the jazz players played a role in creating that kind of pop music of the day.
I don't think they could create of that day. I don't know if they did at all.
I mean, but they were in the studio doing a lot.
Some
of
them
it.
were.
Yeah.
Some of them were. There were a lot of musicians who worked in the studios that weren't really jazz musicians.
Mm-hmm.
That were studio musicians, and that was their specialty.
Yeah.
And they played all different kinds of music, and they were very, very versatile, and they were the kind of musicians that the producers and arrangers loved to have around. They were available with instant help, with instant answers to things, with instant remedy for whatever you want. You want this beat? Clunk, you know.
Uh-huh.
And they were the professional studio players, you know. They were more than jazz players. They were broader than that.
Okay. They had to be able to do whatever was required at the drop of a hat and know the different styles.
They often defined what was required.
Oh.
They were that influential and they were that powerful.
I'm looking at the some of the guys you played with. Ben Webster. What was he like to work with?
Well, he was pretty scary. I mean, he was inspirational to me. I was in the middle of my Duke Ellington period when I got the job, so I was really ready for it, you know.
Yeah.
And he was. It was a wonderful learning experience for me, and so much fun musically. I can't tell you. It was a really nourishing musical thing.
Mm-hmm.
And we had great rhythm players. Mel Lewis was the drummer, and Richard Davis was the bass player. I never had so much fun being in a rhythm section. They were so good, and we just sailed along. It was wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
But when I say it was scary, Ben was. We never knew what to expect from Ben. He would explode. His temper would flare unexpectedly, and it was scary sometimes. At the half note one time, he mouthed off to a policeman, and the rest of the evening was really upsetting. I mean, they backed him up against a wall, and they called squad cars, and it was just a nightmare.
Mm-hmm.
He had this volatile temper.
Yeah. Someone once said to you, jazz is okay, but it ain't got no words.
Sergeant Guard in the Air Force, yeah. He said that to me.
Uh-huh.
He's right.
So you remedied that situation.
Well, I don't know. No, I don't think I write jazz words. You know, I just write words.
Right. Okay.
But he's right about jazz. I thought it was an interesting comment.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Ain't got no words.
It is a little leap that the jazz has to take because it doesn't have that immediate message of what's the song about.
But that was never jazz's message. If jazz had a message,
Uh-huh.
I don't think it was talking about what the song was about.
Yeah.
It was talking about, look what we can do with this.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Why did you move to Los Angeles? Any particular?
I mean, when I left New York?
Yeah.
Well, I was offered a job and I took it. I wanted to get out of New York at the time. That my marriage we'd split up, and we were planning to divorce. And I didn't really want to stay in New York much, and I got a gig offered to me in Los Angeles to write songs, special material on the staff of a television show for NBC. It's going to be a contract for 13 weeks of shows, whatever. I took it and never came back. I went out there and took the job and stayed out in California for another 15 years.
Yeah. What's the scene? How's it different from New York? at that time? How
A lot
was
of
it
places to park. That's one thing. A lot of parking places.
This is important.
Yeah, right.
So you had a whole different group of people to work with, including Jack Sheldon.
Well, I had a lot of friends who were
Yeah.
already had preceded me to California. The whole Merv Griffin band was out there, and I
Yeah.
knew all those guys.
Yeah.
And other musicians that had moved to California. It was good to be back with them again. But you're right. I met all the West Coast gang, you know, and that was terrific. I loved that part of my life. I had a great time in L.A. Although I didn't like living in L.A. as a place to live. I thought it was a malignant environment. I hated it. But many adventures and many happy memories.
Yeah. So you even did some work with the Tijuana Brass?
I was with Herb Alpert's reformed. He reinvented the Tijuana Brass 10 years after the big hit.
Right.
It was in the middle '70s, and he wanted to come back with a more jazz oriented. He wanted like a Chuck Mangione type approach, you know, a kind of a picturesque, macho, flashy jazz approach. You know, with a lot of rhythm and a lot of Latin, and it was fun. There was a hot band, very good musicians on it, including some from the original Tijuana Brass, like the drummer Nick Ceroli, John Pisano, the guitar player.
Yeah.
It was a hot band, but it never caught on with the public the way the original band did. You know?
Yeah.
But we had a ball. We traveled around for a couple of years, and it was like being with the New York Yankees. It was first class.
Cool.
It was really fun. Yeah, it was really fun.
I want to ask you about a few of your tunes, if you don't mind. To your knowledge, are you the only songwriter who's been commissioned by a baseball team?
I have no idea. And it certainly wasn't in the form of a commission. It was more of a permission.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean, they asked me to, you know, if I would mind writing it. I mean, they kind of invited me to write it. And Dodger Blue, you're speaking of, yeah. But there was no commission involved, really. You know, that's too nice a word for it. It was really they were nice enough to ask me to write it, and if they did, and they said that if I did write it, they'd be happy to play it over the loudspeaker. You know, so we recorded it with a big orchestra, arranged and conducted by Alan Broadbent, and Sue Rainey was the singer. And it was indeed used on the public address and other uses. You know.
It must have been like a little puzzle trying to put that whole lyric together.
Well, I think just about all songs are that way. I've often thought of them as that way. Always, it's very much like a crossword puzzle of some kind. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I've read that you said the title is half the battle. Sometimes.
Well, the title is the springboard that I work off of, absolutely. I always try to find a title. If there's a melody given me, I always try to find a title in it, the first thing. Where's the title going to be? What part of the melody will bear that weight? And then then when you find a title, that often gives you an idea as to what the attitude of the song might be, depending on the title. And it gives you an idea of who might be singing it, or what the point of view might be, or you know. Also gives you an idea of how to pay the lyric off. It's nice and neat to find a title that will pay itself off in some way, that will fulfill itself by the end of the song. And in those ways, finding a title is very helpful, especially in beginning a song, giving you a start.
That inspiration, do you find yourself looking at current events or just social things?
No, I don't. I don't. I've had to, as a professional songwriter, I've been asked and commissioned, hired to write topical songs sometimes. So some of the songs that I've written are indeed topical. But I don't enjoy writing them because they fall into a domain that I'm not that much interested in, and that it's material. as opposed to songs. It's material. And I had to write a lot of topical things when I worked for that television show. It's demanding work, and well, because it was demanding because it was television, and it was.
Can you give me an example of?
Well, the stuff that I wrote for that show.
Yeah.
The show was called The Funny Side on NBC. Gene Kelly was the host, weekly comedy show. And my job was to write a production number each week. It would have to last nearly 5 minutes, and it had to involve up to 12 cast members. And the more cast members were involved, the better they liked it. So it was really strange songwriting. It was writing for groups of people. For two people here, it would answer what two people over there did, and they would react lyrically according to some plot. Each week the song had to be about the week's topic. So I had to write songs about the funny side of blah blah, the funny side of blah blah, the funny side of money, the funny side of news, the funny side of television, the funny side of advertising. So I had to write songs that were like funny. It was comedy.
Yeah.
It was comedy writing.
Did it ever irk you that you were writing things that probably were going to be used once? Or was it just the job?
One of the songs, called The Sports Page, I used later on in life.
Okay. But
it was the only one of the songs of the bunch that I wrote that had any application later. Yes, it was. There was something uncomfortable about knowing that you were writing something that was deliberately ephemeral. It was going to be gone. And in those days, there wasn't even routine taping of a show. It was done once.
Right. It's not going to go into syndication.
I'd love to. I do have recordings that I made myself from when I was there and listened on television at home to the show, and I put a microphone up next to the speaker of the TV and recorded it onto my Tandberg,
Yeah.
So, but that's how long ago it was,
Right. That's really interesting. Oh, and I see you, a little later on, you also did some stuff for Schoolhouse Rock.
You're right.
Which was a great show.
That was Bob Doro's baby. Somebody thought the idea up, but Doro contributed the musical thing. He was the musical director, and it's the stamp of Bob Doro that made that show what it was. That and the great artwork. Yeah, Doro is a particular hero of mine.
Yeah, you guys have collaborated a number of times.
No, we haven't collaborated that much, but we've known each other for 40 years now, and I've been involved in a lot of Bob's projects. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
Collaboration was I'm Hip we did together. That was our song that we wrote jointly. And recently we have a 2-piano show that we've been doing. And we recorded it in front of an audience in L.A., and it's on Blue Note. It's called, the show's called Who's On First, and that's the name of the CD.
All right. Do you have particular comedians that you like?
Comedians?
Comedians, yeah.
Albert Brooks. Yeah, I really like him. I can't think of anyone else right off the top of my head, but I know I admire him. Oh, and I like the guy, Christopher Guest and Harry Shearer, the guys that did Spinal Tap.
Spinal Tap. Oh,
and also, I also like the people who did Best of Show, the dog movie. It's current. I don't know if you've seen it yet.
I have not seen that yet. It sounds like a good.
Yeah, those
good
are the
subject.
Yeah, Christopher Guest is one of my heroes, I guess.
I don't know how to ask this question, but I'll just ask it. Do you think your lyrics are funny?
Sometimes,
Sometimes.
yeah. Sometimes.
I mean, sometimes it's hard to be objective about your own work.
Well, I mean for them to be.
Yeah.
I mean for them to be,
good.
but I mean, a lot of times they're not jokes, but I don't know if they're meant to draw laughs, but they're certainly meant to amuse the listener. Yeah,
Yes.
right.
Okay.
Right.
I have a couple little pieces of material that I wanted to.
I walked in, I sat down, took my customary look around. I saw a fine young thing heading straight my way. Before I could think of something slick to say, she smiled, sat down and said, "Yes, you may." She was slapping her cakes on me, my friend. Slapping her cakes on me. She was slapping
Now,
her cakes on me.
I'm afraid I don't know what that means.
Doesn't mean anything.
Doesn't mean anything?
Well, yeah, it means to flirt outrageously with somebody.
Yeah.
One of my wives, an ex-wife of mine, made that up, that expression
No
up.
kidding.
And so that was, I thought it was very colorful. You know,
It is
I don't know. I have no idea what cakes she's talking about, but it's interesting.
It is.
It's a good turn of phrase. You know.
It is a. I like it. It's interesting where inspiration comes from sometimes. This is one of my favorite things that is somewhat borrowing, I guess.
Walk on with hope in your heart, and you're in for a big surprise. When you're marooned, marooned.
Can you still hit those notes?
In a blizzard of light, a blizzard of light.
I really love what you did with walk on with hope in your heart.
Yeah, a lot of people laugh. I love it when they laugh at that. Yeah,
yeah.
I think it's funny too.
It's unexpected, I think, and it really, it's a clever song too, with all the kind of the cliches of the language that we hear so often. How long does it take you, on average, to write a lyric like that?
Like Blizzard of
Blizzard
Lies.
of Lies, yeah.
That one took years, because not because it took years, because I carried the title around in my head for years before I ever acted on it. You know.
Yeah.
But I remember thinking a lot. That would be a great title, and then I never really followed through on it.
Uh-huh.
I had it in mind for a decade, though. But otherwise, it depends. If I'm under the gun, I don't know how. And there, believe it or not, there are situations even in today's music business where I might be under the gun. Mm-hmm. Like Johnny Mandel called me about a month ago before I came on this trip that I'm on now. He told me that he needed some material for a new record he was producing that was liable to be a popular record. And he told me he wanted me to write lyrics to his old song, Hershey Bar, that Stan Getz record from 1948 or whatever, you know. Mm. So and he wanted it pretty quickly and promptly. So I rose to the occasion. I can still do it.
Excellent.
And although it's tough for me to start, you know, it's a procrastinator.
Yeah.
And I waited again till the last minute, but I got it in there. It took me 3 days, 4 days, but that's what it is 3 days of nothing, and the fourth day of pouring forth.
Wow.
You know, but without the 3 days of nothing, the fourth day was not going to happen, and that's a horrible routine to have to get used to. I mean, you might be a writer yourself, and you know how it feels to have nothing, but you got to go through the nothing, trying again and again and again before the something will happen. That's the hard part for me.
All the time you're saying, yeah, it's going to come, it's going to come.
Exactly.
You just wonder, like...
And the thing is, don't stop. It's okay, you know. Yeah, this does feel doomed, but it's not. Keep going. You keep telling yourself, you know.
That can be a little nerve-wracking, especially if you have people waiting on you, I suppose, or counting on you.
Well, it can be nerve-wracking, and it can also be stimulating, and it can be an impetus to your writing. It can make you write.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. I think I have this.
Oklahoma town on a dusty country road.
I love this. It's
Just sitting there and blinking.
it's got a certain Americana.
Glenn Campbell's-esque. Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. I was trying to write that way. I was trying to write like, I don't know what you call it, country. We called it country western or whatever,
Yeah.
you know. This was the middle 60s. And, you know, I was starting to write songs, and I figured might as well try to write for the market. And this was the market, part of it. Publisher actually said to me, I like these are nice songs and everything, you know, very funny and nice. But, you know, why don't you go home and write some country western stuff? Write a cowboy song,
Really?
you know. Write some cowboy songs. I can get you some records, you know. So I went home and I wrote some. This is not the only one. I wrote maybe a half a dozen of them, you know. And I like this one.
Yeah, I love this one. This chord change,
Yeah.
same thing that's in Georgia, isn't it? It's like the 1 to a major 3 or something.
Yeah, well,
I just
it's
find
a 3 chord,
It's
yeah.
so.
Well,
It's got a character to it.
it's very churchy and
Yeah.
sounds like Bach harmony, you know. I mean, it's
This is nice too.
it's
with
theory one. Is
It's
what it
theory
is.
one.
That's what it is. That's it.
Well, good work.
On a dusty country road.
Nice.
Just sitting there and blinking.
Who are your you have piano heroes?
Yeah, I do. First name that comes into my mind is Jimmy Rolls. I've always been crazy about his playing. Ever since I heard the records he made in the 1940s, I was crazy about his playing. And when I finally met him years later, he didn't disappoint me. He was just, he'd even become a greater piano player than I even knew about. He was my favorite. Mel Powell knocked me out. I loved the way he articulated his music. It was beautiful. Teddy Wilson still thrills me. Just the exuberance of his playing when he was playing in the 1930s and, on the Billie Holiday records and some of the Benny Goodman small band sextet records. Teddy Wilson's just on fire, you know. I loved his playing. Nat Cole just killed me. Tatum did too, but in a different way. Tatum seemed unattainable. There was no way to try to match that.
Yeah.
No way to try to play that game. Although a lot of piano players can do it, but not me. I couldn't play that game.
Yeah.
Jeez, that's a tough game.
I know. When you listen to that, you just say, "That's not possible."
Yeah, right.
How could you think that fast and then play that fast?
Yeah, but you know, and yet, I'll tell you, I think the greatest technical piano player I ever heard in my life was Errol Garner.
Really?
I think he took the prize, I think. I had never heard anybody so virtuosic as what he did, and that includes Tatum, as far as I'm concerned. Garner got the greatest sound out of a piano and generated the most power and swing and lyricism out of a piano of anybody I can think of. He's quite a remarkable player, I think. And not real influential, because he's pretty non-copyable, Errol Garner.
That's a heck of a statement right there, I think. Let me think about that for a moment. He wasn't an influence because, not as much perhaps because people could not take from his style and continue it.
I think he just opened a lot of piano players' ears to color and rhythmic punches that they hadn't thought of. I mean, he really was such a unique player that he contributed a lot. This is what I'm saying. I think he's overlooked as a great contributor.
Oh, okay.
I don't even think he was mentioned in the Ken Burns thing at all.
Yeah.
Like Errol Garner, you know. Anyway, I always loved his playing.
Yeah.
Al Haig, Bud Powell, Hank Jones,
Right.
Tommy Flanagan.
You get much time to woodshed at the piano these days?
Well, yeah, I do. I don't exactly woodshed. I don't know. I go into spasms of like for a few weeks or a few months or whatever. I get interested in learning repertoire or you know, making up a repertoire for myself. You know what spurs me to practice is if somebody wants me to make an album and I got to come up with like piano solos like I did for this last Arbors album.
Yeah.
I had to kind of get some stuff in shape, you know.
Mm-hmm.
That spurs me to play.
Yeah.
I do quite a bit of sideman playing, not quite a bit, but a couple times a week maybe. I play in Portland.
I liked your interpretation of Groovin' High on this CD.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like that too.
Yeah. It's an interesting way to treat it. What's it like trying to place songs these days? Or do you have a reputation enough that...
Well, I'm getting a reputation now that singers look for my work.
Yeah.
And they see because they pick up on new songs really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
My song Sideman was covered almost immediately by 2 female singers, which I thought was kind of odd but gratifying.
Mm-hmm.
But most of the songs I use myself. I just sing them,
Right.
record them, and then I do my act, and that's my ammunition. You know, I mean, I'm
Right.
writing them now mainly for myself to sing, which is fine.
That's good.
But it's okay, yeah.
Yeah.
But number one, it means they may not be covered a lot. And number two, it means, too, that they're going to be of a certain character which doesn't require a great voice.
Mm-hmm.
And that dimension shapes my songs to a certain degree. There's not many of them that are arios or that display the voice, you know.
Yeah.
So placing songs with singers is often has to do with giving the singer something that he or she will be able to sing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's the way singers want. A lot of singers, that's why they're singers, right?
Right, because they've got the instrument.
But when I write, I'm writing according to the limitations of my own vocal ability. The songs aren't going to be that, they're not going to display great singing, nor are they going to rely on long and loud held notes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, that to some degree, to a big degree, shapes my songs. You know. I bet Mose Allison would say the same thing. You know, a lot of his songs are shaped by the way he sings.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Doro, on the other hand, is a different kind of composer. He's not bound by his own limitations. Doro writes for a voice, and he's a more thorough composer, more versatile composer than I am. He writes a lot of songs that singers get their teeth into. Love Came on Stealthy Fingers and songs like that are ballads in demand by singers, and they use it to show off their voice. Carmen McRae and people like that, they bend it around. I don't have a lot of songs like that.
If you look back in your career, this is kind of a hard question, but are any gigs or certain times that stand out as really memorable for either negative or positive or humorous reasons, or?
Oh, geez, wow, Monk! I mean, it's
I know. There's so many.
It's one gig after another. You know, I mean, what do you want? Each one of them was that they all were they had their own stories. You know? I guess the gig I think of the most as my golden age of New York playing was the one at the Half Note.
Yeah.
Which I held for, along with other piano players, with Ross Tompkins and Roger Kellaway and I maybe were the 3 players that were used as house players. We were the utility guys. So we got to play with a lot of great players, and my specialty was with Al Cohn and Zoot Sims. That was the band I felt at home with. You know.
Yeah.
I spent 8 years with them.
They were a great match, weren't they?
Yeah.
Those
oh,
two.
yeah. And then in New York, I mean, in L.A., I don't know, I guess the most fun I had was the Herb Alpert days, you know. In Portland, I had some, I think my favorite gig was with Becky Kilgore, the singer, the Portland singer whom I met up there, and we had a job together in a hotel 2 nights a week for 5 years.
Wow.
And just a duo, and that was, I loved that gig. And last week, I finished 3 weeks at the Algonquin in New York, in what I described to myself as the favorite gig of my life. It was so much fun. So that was just, I just finished a memorable gig.
Who was on that gig? Was it just you?
It was just me at the Algonquin, yeah.
Nice room, huh?
It was great.
Yeah.
It was great.
Do you ever do any teaching?
No.
Is it possible in your head to describe what's in your head when you're improvising?
Yes, it is impossible. It's impossible,
Okay.
yeah. I have no idea.
Okay.
You know, improvising is not as such a big deal as people make it. And you're a musician, and you know what I'm saying. Every musician can improvise. Anybody can improvise, and it's no big deal. So I'm not impressed by that. And I think the importance of improvisation is over exaggerated, you know.
Well, what is a big deal then for a
Well, I mean, the
person?
quality of what you're playing is is the big deal.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't just say that you improvise and you're going to sound like Zoot Sims, because you're not. And what are you going to say when Johnny Hodges plays the same thing exactly the same way for 30 years? He's not improvising, but are you going to say it's anything less than the most beautiful thing you've ever heard? So improvising is not really where it's at. Jazz to me is an attitude about music. It's a certain sensibility brought to the performance of certain music that's designed or that's friendly to jazz treatment. You know, pop songs, ideally, I think that's what fed the jazz ethic, was the pop songs.
Of the 30s?
Of the 20s, 30s, 40s, the golden, I mean, Jerome Kern, Sigmund Romberg, Victor Herbert, Jerome Kern, Irving Berlin, Richard Rodgers, George Gershwin. That's what changed jazz. That's what opened the jazz musicians' ears. That's how jazz evolved. It was never referred to once in Ken Burns' documentary, by the way. Not once was that ever mentioned. The food of us jazz players and all of the jazz players was the work of the greatest pop songwriters we've ever known. And thank God everybody coincided in the 1920s or 1930s. It was a lot deeper and a lot more musically oriented than the Ken Burns thing would suggest. Ken Burns' thing was heavy on the sociology, light on the musicology.
Okay.
The minor seventh chord had more to do with jazz sounding the way it does than the blues does. But the minor seventh chord is not that easy to describe or make dramatic. You know what I mean? Where would Charlie Parker be if it weren't for All the Things You Are and Jerome Kern, who defined the chordal movement of bebop with that song? That whole song is about bebop and where bebop went. The way he manipulated harmonies and that melody, and the way he harmonized that whole thing opened up jazz musicians' ears all over the place, including a genius or two like Charlie Parker or Lester Young. The minor seventh is what changed jazz, okay?
Because of where it led?
Exactly, because of where it led the ear. And the minor seventh was a device of the pop song composer. It was a device of Ravel, I suppose, but I'm talking about the pop songwriters, like even the unschooled ones were using the minor seventh, like Irving Berlin. The trained ones, like Kern, were using it too as part of their arsenal. It was the two chord, the minor seventh became, you know, that's what changed jazz. That's why jazz grew up the way it did. That's my feeling.
I like the theory.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it allowed, or did it allow for that, those songs, for instance, that don't start on the one chord?
Yeah.
Is that part of what you're talking about?
No, I'm just talking about how music was harmonized.
Yeah, okay.
And the decline of the dominant seventh and its replacement by suspended introductory harmony.
All right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's what changed jazz.
Wow.
A lot more than race or some kind of purposeful artistic mission. I mean, it was just, it was the opening up of the American ear by Gershwin, Cole Porter. That's it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's it. That's the way I feel.
Okay. It's a good, great statement. It's going to give me some food for thought for sure. Yeah, there's an awful lot of statements made about what jazz players were intending to do and their role in society and all that, and maybe it's not that complicated.
It's like joining a lodge. A secret handshake, everybody knows that it's like a two chord.
All right. I feel like I just got a little secret of life here.
Yeah. Good luck.
Good luck. Okay. I won't quit my day gig on that, though. Well, I know you have to go perform, and
I'm happy to go. I mean, not that I haven't enjoyed this,
right.
but
Right.
let's play already.
Let's do something.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. I appreciate your time. It's been really fascinating.
Thanks. I enjoyed it.
And,
I enjoyed it.
I'll be listening later on tonight.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.